Hi, and welcome to another episode of Consultants Corner. In today's new era where collaboration and partnership is becoming more prevalent and important, it is our belief that an open narrative and sharing of ideas is absolutely vital. The industry possesses some really exceptional operators, consultants, and contractors, and our aim is to bring greater insights which can often lie hidden away. I'm Maxine Crow, your host, and I'm delighted to be joined by Chris Sprague from Cisa Consultants. Hi, Chris.
Hi, Maxine. How are you today?
I'm really well. Thank you. Thank you so much for spending some time with us today. I really appreciate it. We appreciate it. The audience appreciates it.
My pleasure, hopefully.
Okay, so we're gonna ask you a few questions. We keep it conversational, and let's just get started. So, Chris, tell us about yourself and your career.
Okay, well, in terms of catering, I am, one of the original lifelong caterers, or worked in food and catering all my life. I started an original from the wash up, really, to a managing director's position, and I just worked my way through. And when I left school, before I left school, like many people, I worked in the wash up at the local pub. When I left school, I didn't know what to do really. I worked in a butcher shop for a couple of years and quite enjoyed that, but thought there must be more to life. And then I moved to Bournemouth and worked in hotels as a commie and trained all through all corners of the kitchen really. Worked quite hard and did very well. And there was a point I worked for hotels, and I heard about contract catering, so I wanted to work for Gardner Merchant for about 5 years in Bournemouth. That was really interesting. And then I had my a little consultancy business in those days with a partner, and we used to open restaurants for people. I did it sort of on the side, and we had a restaurant that wasn't going very well, so I decided to take it on myself. So I had a little hotel and restaurant in the New Forest, which was great fun, and we did that for 5 years. Oh, it's lovely. Yeah, I mean, I live in the forest now. It's really nice, and so open, and you can do so much down here. It's lovely, really. And then when I sort of felt that was time to come to an end, I went to work for what was then Nelson Hind, which later became Elior, where I stayed for about 25 years. And there I worked from, started as, I think it's an area. Well, no, I started off running a big account for them, and then I became an area manager and an operations director, and eventually I ended up as a managing director of 3 or 4 parts of the business over various times. And then when I finished there, I was then gone into doing client retention, which is quite a difficult thing to do, I discovered. But we were quite successful with it. I did that for about 8 years, and then I got to a point where driving 50,000 miles a year didn't really start to appeal any longer. I wanted to spend more time at home and do different things. So and they were very kind to me early on when I left, and so I set up a little consultancy business, and it was all going really well. And then COVID came along, so we had, however, 18 months of not really doing much. And then I started again a couple of years ago, and I've got a lovely client base, not massive. I don't want a massive client base, and I tend to work with people I really like. And I split it between a little bit of B&I business and a bit of sort of helping people retain their business, which is quite a passion with me. I think it gets underlooked, retaining business. Everybody's great to sell, but what do you do about keeping it? And historically in food services, quite a high churn, and to be able to stop some of that, I think has been really good. Really interesting.
So with the retention of client business, is there a particular strategy that you would?
Yeah, it wasn't when I started doing it, but I'd always been quite good at keeping my business when I was the MD of various businesses, and I worked out that really you've got sort of 18 months to fix anything that's going wrong. You've got to start that far out, because you've got to identify what's not really working. You've then got to fix it. You've then got to allow people to forget what you weren't doing very well and to remember the things you're now doing much better. Yeah. And that way you can work towards a strategy of keeping the business. And that worked really, really well. But you can't run in it when the tender arrives and think you're going to save anything, because actually it's all too late. But we did an awful lot of renegotiating the business to keep, to get ourselves in a better position, and then try and avoid the tender by renegotiation, which we're very successful at. I mean, sometimes tenders still happen, and if you're in a good place, you keep to win the business, but it's always better to try and avoid a tender, because as somebody once said to me, when you go window shopping, you're not going to buy anything, then you come home with a load of bags, and that's just what happens with clients and businesses. Really, they don't want to change, but then because the opportunity is there, they do.
Yeah. That's really interesting. That's really interesting, especially about the shopping bags. I tend to go to our local co-op for 2 items and end up with a big bag of shopping. So I can relate.
I kind of do that as well. Yeah, I go out with some milk and come back with like 2 bags full.
Just think, what happened? So Chris, what are the highlights of your role as a consultant? But you cover the three areas, actually: consulting, operating, and contracting. So what are the highlights from each of those parts?
I think my highlight when I was a chef was always, building teams around me and people, and really getting out really nice food and being very successful, having happy customers. I think as a contractor, it was really comes back to retaining the business and doing a good job for the people you work for, the clients, and the company I work for. That time was Eliel mainly. I think that's really important. You do a great job for them, and I think in the consultancy, it's making a bit of a difference and helping people. I really do quite like people, and I like to see people succeed. So when I've worked with lots of lovely people, and as my career, and you've seen them progress and do really, really well, that to me is a real buzz, really. I think, and I look at some people in the industry now, Roland Hart springs to mind. Not that I probably have much influence on him, but we worked together for a couple of years, and I was chatting to him this morning about something and thought, it's lovely to be associated with people who have gone on to do really well. I think that's, is a big thing with me, people.
Yeah, that's amazing. And we are in a people industry and a service industry, and I particularly like to mentor as well. So the roles I end up in, it's not just about doing the role; it's so much more than that. And if you can leave people with that energy to go on and do more, and just become whatever they want to become. Sometimes people can kind of think, oh well, why you can't go on and do such and such. But I think if you're given the right type of mentors and people around you, strong people, then you can go on and achieve amazing.
I think the hardest bit is getting people to believe in themselves, actually. Because once you get people to believe in themselves, then they can do anything. And there's always this big thing about what's coaching, what's mentoring. They do blur, I think, in my mind. But I think if you get people to have self-belief and understand where they want to go, that's half the battle. Because a lot of people go through sort of jobs, really, wondering if they're doing the right thing or they're in the right job. And it's just difficult, really, isn't it? But it's hard to understand what's going on in somebody's mind sometimes. So if you can help them with that, that's terrific, really. So that's the things that always buzz, really. When you see people who are not doing so well or doing really well, and they've done even better because you've helped them a little bit. That's really a great thing to do, really.
It's very, very rewarding. Very rewarding. So what are the challenges that you've had, and how did you address them?
In terms of consultancy or just challenges generally? I mean, I think
not life challenge, just in terms of your talk about your most recent. I'd say.
I think that with in the consultancy, obviously, when I started doing it, I was quite lucky because I think some people came to me and offered me work, helping them actually with retention. So that was really good, and I was able to go out and talk to their clients, understand what was going on, and then tell them, report back what the clients thought. I also ended up, funny enough, talking of mentoring some hairdressers at one stage, which I never really understood, but it was somebody I knew who knew somebody and said, could you go and do that? Some challenges really is, I mean, as a consultant, your challenge is always to keep yourself in enough work. And I've been extremely lucky because I don't really want to work massively. I want to work, but I don't want to be overrun, because if I did that, could have stayed at Elio and, you know, carried on doing that. So I think it is about getting the work-life balance right. That's always a challenge to me. And I'm a bit keen to say yes sometimes and then go, why did I say yes to that? So those are always challenges. I think when I look around the industry, I think the industry suffers from challenges really around people. And I think, you know, catering as an industry has got to stop calling itself or allowing itself to be thought as a job you do before you do a job. So, you know, you've got to make it into much more of a career for people and get people to really understand it's a great way of making a living, but treat them like if they went to do something else. And that doesn't really happen enough as it should, really. It's a bit of a bug for me, really. I think, you know, make it, you know, they do a lot for graduates in the industry, but we should do more for just ordinary people and allow them and help them to train and go on to bigger roles. Not everybody.
Do you think that there's a clear route for a clear career path and a route for, so like you started from the, like same as me, started grassroots in FM. Do you think there's a clear route for anyone in hospitality wanting to excel, or do you think there's more work?
There's more work to do on it. I think there are in some of the larger companies. I mean, people like Hilton have great schemes and things like that, but it's not generally accepted across the industry that you should be developing your next people all the time. Having said that, and it comes to my next question really about trends, there is a lot more training going on, an awful lot more training, and it's a lot more meaningful training where people are actually being trained, and then when they come back to the workplace, they're being challenged to use it, which I think has always been a bit hit and miss in the past. But no, I don't feel there's a clear enough path of how you're going to do things. When I first started in kitchens, you went in as a commis, and you went to be a chef de partie, and then you went to be a sous chef, and then you went to be the head chef. And that was a pretty clear path if you were good enough. But it was also accepted that some people would never either want to do that or perhaps be good enough to do that. And that's okay, as long as you can find everybody a place where they've got a meaningful career. And I think that's what's sort of lacking now, as I see it.
I was reading that there's some initiatives with companies now as well for ex-offenders, the social enterprise route as well, people that are in unemployment, and all these things just take time to embed, and a shift in the culture in industry cultures take time as well, don't they?
I agree with you totally, and I think it is moving in the right direction, but I would just like to see it move a bit quicker, really. And get so people aren't thinking, like I said at the beginning, not thinking, oh, I'm going to go off and be a fireman, but I'll do this while I'm waiting to get in. Get them to come and make it a career. It's a great career. I've had a fantastic time, and I couldn't speak highly enough about it. But you've got to get people to think like that. That's just really huge challenge. I think, really,
Yeah, we can start chipping away about that one. Okay, so next question: what do you consider to be the future trends in the industry, and how can we prepare for change?
Funny, really, I used to work for a chap called Chris Hind of Nelson Hind, and he always said, "Chris, this is a very circular business. So what happens today will happen again in the years, 2 or 3 years time." And actually, he was quite right. But there are nice things coming around. I think, as I touched on earlier, training is much more important. There's more of it going on than ever. And you look at most of the big contract companies and hotels; they all have training academies, albeit they're not academies and buildings, but they are academies, and people can go and do many things and progress their career. I think is fantastic. So I think that's a trend, that's a good trend, and it hopefully will carry on, and people will continue to build. I think in technology, I'm not a great technology person, but I've noticed over the years that technology creeps into catering, and sometimes it comes from supermarkets, sometimes it comes from other places, and it's getting people to use the technology. So, there's lots of great systems for menus and costings and everything else around. It's getting people to actually use that. And then we've had some very fancy tills in the industry for years, but nobody ever uses what comes out to them to tell you, how many people have been for lunch and things like that. So that's a trend I think is starting to pick up. People are starting to push and say they want to do more with technology. robots have been touched on other conversations, and I think there will be some robotic stuff coming in. I think it's just a matter of time in the repetitive tasks when somebody can work out a robot to do it. But of course, for something like that to happen, there's got to be some value to the people to invent it, and to make them take enough interest to build the robot. So I think we'll see what happens on that. And I think it's an interesting development, really. I think
it's interesting you say about the technology and the robots, because when I was in town, I was in London yesterday. Went into it was actually I can't remember if it was an Itsu or it was Itsu, and there wasn't any attendants on any tills anymore. They'd all been replaced by kiosks. So you would do like a bit of the displays where you literally tap in what you've got, and then it was just all automated. So there's an attendant there to support you if something wasn't quite right. But yeah, it is changing now, where it was literally no one in the shop apart from that person, and there was around 6 different kiosks for customers pick their food. And
I think supermarkets have been doing that for quite a while, really, haven't they? You go into Waitrose or Co-op and you scan all your own shopping, and so I think it's going to happen. But it's interesting where it always comes from, not where you think it's going to come from. And people get used to it. And then when clients don't want to accept that, you say, well, they do it every day when they go to the supermarket, and then clients are more adapt to take it on and do it, which is good, I think.
Yeah. I think there's got to be a mixture. Some of the other conversations we've had have talked about the retaining that human element, just for that customer experience as well. So what are your views on that?
Well, I think that will always retain. I mean, hospitality is a people business, and you're always going to have to have people there. There's always got to be somebody around for when you're stuck and you need something, or just to welcome you. So I hope that doesn't go away. I think by nature of the business, it should stay, really.
Yeah.
We don't know, really, do you? It's all quite interesting and keeps going, really. Yeah.
Let's see what happens, shall we, on that one? Okay, so can you give the audience your top 3 recipes for success working with clients, caterers, and consultants?
Yes. I have 3 sort of principles for success that I've sort of used over the years. And the first one is it's about listening. And I think Chris Stern touched on it last week. It's very interesting, but Stephen Covey wrote a very interesting piece about listening. And he talked about listening with the intent to understand, not listening with the intent to reply. And I think that happens quite often. And I used to say this when I was out with people in the field. I'd say, just listen and don't say anything, and then ask questions once you've understood what they're trying to tell you. And I've always tried to do that. So try and understand what somebody's trying to tell you, and don't be frightened to ask questions around that. Don't go off and try and answer the question straight away if you haven't got a clue what it is, really. The other thing is, I've always felt you should build a team around you. Now, the team doesn't have to be in the room with you, but like now, I haven't got anybody who works for me, but I've got lots of people I can phone up. If I don't know something, I can ring up and say, can you help me with this, or put me in the right direction with that? And that is sort of building a team, and you always need a team, and you don't need to be the star player on the team. In fact, quite the opposite. You can almost be the thickest person on the team and still be very successful, because the team will take you there, and it's understanding that, so you don't have to be the star. That's my second thing. The third thing, I've always, it's a bit bizarre this really, but I've always taken a bit of a view from Rudyard Kipling's poem, If, particularly the bits about the 2 imposters, triumph and disaster, because I think it's very easy to get, when something goes really well, it's very easy to get very enthusiastic and leap around, tell a good amount, all that sort of stuff. But when something goes wrong, you've got to then balance that. And when I used to work with a team, and they'd come to me and say, oh, Chris, this has gone wrong, people could never understand why I was quite calm about it. Well, I wasn't really. I felt you had to be, because when somebody came and said to me, I've just won this great contract, I'd be quite enthusiastic, but not over the top. I think you've got to balance those 2 things. It's a really important thing to me, is that you keep everybody on an even keel and pushing forward and looking to do what they're going to do. So it's great if anybody wants to, just read that poem. It makes you think an awful lot about how you do things and the way you behave yourself and how you conduct yourself. And I think the fourth thing really I do bear in mind is when you're doing something. And an old chief executive once said to me, when I was much younger and a bit more enthusiastic about life, and he said, Chris, you've got to remember that everything you say and do is how people think they should do things. So when you're doing things, you should keep that in your mind. If you're going to behave in a way, other people will do the same. So that's how I sort of try and do things. I won't say I do it all successfully, but it is.
You try. Well, just like your old chief executive, very early on in my career, there was that saying, "Behavior breeds behavior," and when you're working in the industries, it truly does. But can you just remind us again, what was the name of the poem, please?
It was "If" by Rudyard Kipling.
Rudyard.
Yeah. If.
Okay, I'll post that later. I'll post that later for the audience to read.
It's a great poem, and it's easy to pick up on the internet.
I'm going to post it.
Yeah,
that's a good one. How would you like to see the sector evolve and change?
Well, if we talk about contract catering, in B&I and education and healthcare and things like that, I firmly believe that the cost plus model needs to be evolved and worked. And I don't think it'd be a good step to go back to fixed price business at all. But I think what people have got to understand is in a contract, you've got to build a lot of trust. If you can build trust, then the whole thing becomes a bit more honest. And if you're on a cost plus contract, you've got to be prepared to explain where you spent the money, because very often you're spending the money and then you're trotting onto the client with the bill and say, "Here we are, Mr. Client, here's the bill," and not with a real explanation of where it's all gone. So I think you've got to be prepared to do that. That will make it work. I think the other thing in tenders is, and I think Chris, when he started at EP, started all this process. I think one of his thoughts was, why do tenders have to be so expensive? And I don't think they do. I've had a bit of a theory for a number of years that you really, when you tender business, you only have a few things you can tender. The wages are very often set up by the client because they have to sit in line with whatever is being paid on the side.
Yeah.
The food cost really you can measure through Quinel's and other people that can measure food cost. The selling prices are very often driven in the restaurants are very often driven by the client because they want the food to be a price that people can afford. So there's very little left to tender really, apart from the fee, which you should then be able to tender and look. And I think the other thing that's got to evolve is people can't keep taking the cheapest bids, and then when it doesn't all work, go, well, it's nothing to do with me, you put the bid in. So there's a lot of a cultural change I think it's got to happen in the world of contracting.
Yeah.
And get away from
agree.
this. Yeah. Sorry, go
on. I agree. I agree with you, and particularly in procurement, when we do tender services, I think post COVID and even after, it's not just about the cost anymore. It's about so much more, and the cost is almost a secondary, third criteria for the bids. It's very much around the quality, the type of relationship, and that fit with who you're going to be working with is more prevalent. And now we're going to come on to the next question around sustainability, actually.
But just to go back to that, I think relationships are very often are talked about, but people don't really understand what relationships are sometimes. And I've heard people say, well, I've got a great relationship with that person. I met them once and had a cup of tea with them. Well, that's not to me a relationship. That's just you met them.
No.
And I think there's a bit of an understanding and work to go on in that market as well. That part of the market, sorry, you were talking about.
Yeah. Well, it's the next question actually, which is what I was coming on to. How important is sustainability today?
Well, it's very important, and I think we've sort of moved. Sorry, just my screen went dark. Right. Yes, I think we've now got to a point where most people accept that, you know, plastics have got to be dealt with, and all the big items, or not big, all the items that have been very high profile are being dealt with, and I think that's great. You know, waste streams, all that sort of stuff. I think the next thing I think we've got to get to look at, funny enough, Maxine, is purchasing, because I think we very often we need to get people to understand that the market in the UK is the UK, and local supply is something from the UK. It's not, because if you think about food, you can't grow carrots in Devon, it's too hilly, and you don't get much milk out of Norfolk because it's too flat. There's not enough grass, you know. So I think you've got to sort of start to do that. So when people talk about local produce, that to me is the UK. And that, if you can start to do that, and we start to really use everything in the UK as much as we can, then we're not importing stuff. And that's, to me, is probably quite a way forward for the future. And I think it's important we use local suppliers, but not in the way that people think. I think you've got to get your local suppliers integrated with your national suppliers, so they're producing stuff and delivering it to them, because the big suppliers will then deliver for you if you can get it to their to the right places. I think that's a big step forward, will be when we get people to really understand the supply chain and how we can then stop stuff being moved around in vehicles. And does that all sort of come together as a bit of sense, really? And it's difficult to get people to think about that, because everybody hangs on the corner shop can deliver them potatoes. Well, they can't really. They just can't do enough of it. And I think that's the next step in sustainability, where we start to think about the big ticket items to get moved around.
Yeah.
Interesting, in London, they are trying to start to get people to do one central delivery, but it's not really working quite yet. I don't think it's got refined enough as yet. But I'm sure eventually it will, you know, and just use electric vehicles in the middle of London, which would be
We've had there's some suppliers that are looking at electric vehicles and looking at that square. It's what, the square mile or few miles in central. It is coming, and I think as operators, consultants, as we understand it more, I think it will then become just like every day, a new standard, I think.
Yeah. So I think sustainability, you know, you've got to look at it in sort of different ways to just the way we've looked at it up to now. We've got to start looking at other items that would, and even traveling, you know, I mean, it's sort of, COVID's sort of done quite a lot of that for us, but it's interesting how much you can do from home now.
Yes.
Yeah. The contract.
well, if you're on a site, you can't really do that. Could you though? Could you do that from home? No, you couldn't.
No, you need to be there.
Yeah, that's true enough. Okay, so final question, Chris. What advice would you give to new players entering the profession? Right.
I wrote something down about this. No, I can't find it.
You've got a list this long.
I got some prompts.
Scroll.
I think if I was going to suggest to anybody becoming a consultant, I think first of all you need to have a lot of experience and really understand the business. Because if you don't, I've seen people come in and they don't really do very well. That's not to say you've got to be as old as me, or, you know, but just make sure you really understand what's going on. I think you need to understand the tender process, and it's quite a long-term process, really. And I think work on trust and things like that. It's not a, I mean, I'm sure when you talk to Vic Laws about it, you have a very strong opinion about it. But I think it's not a business for everybody. You've got to be quite successful before you come into it. I think that would be a big help.
And then what about from an operator's perspective? Because you're quite unique in that you've got all three. So.
Yeah, I think from an operations point of view, you need to learn your business. You need to, I mean, going back to what I talked about, recipes for success is very much, if you're going to be an operator, that's what you need to do. You need to listen. You need to build a team. And yeah, I suggest reading Kipling, but definitely the first two. Understand and learn your business, and listen to your clients, and try and understand why they have catering, because very often people don't do that. They just go in and there's a restaurant, they think, oh, that's fine, but nobody else. You ask the question, well, why do you have it? You know, so if you're a big law firm, it might be you don't want people to go out. If you're in a factory, well, there is nowhere for people to go. It's not a complicated thing, but if you start understanding that, you then can understand how you're putting the offer together and making the whole thing much more holistically work. Yeah, I think that's one I'd look at it. And yeah, it's funny, but people talk about, good food and everything, but people are in a catering company, so good food should be a given. And really what you then got to look at is how you deliver that, how you make that experience count for everybody that gets it touches.
Yeah.
And they were saying earlier, actually, I think the whole experience matters. I think it was always one of the truest things I ever heard. So if you think about when you go out to a restaurant, you might have a really great time, but the food might not be that great, but you had a really good experience, so you'll go back. And then people sort of don't really take that on board. Yeah.
It's very true. We've got a local Miller and Carter's that we don't go all the time, but there's a particular chap. He comes and he greets you, and he just recognizes you. He knows your name, and even if you haven't been for months and months and months, and you show up, it's just like it was just like yesterday that he saw you, and it just makes you feel really special. It's really cool.
It does, yeah. And it's it's those little things in hospitality that really matter, and I think you have to understand that. And if you can do that, you're not necessarily remember everybody's name, because not everybody can remember names, but just remember faces or something about a person. And if you just remember something about them, if it's about their children or about their partner or anything, it just makes such a big difference, doesn't it, when you get asked that question?
Yeah. It's really something. It's really something. Thank you for today. I'm just going to do a bit of a sum up. So in terms of some of the top 3 recipes, listening, and I will actually post the poem "If" for our listeners and our audience. Chris, if anyone in the audience wants to contact you, what's the best way for the people to reach you?
Probably email initially, I think, or through LinkedIn. A lot of people find that quite easy to get hold of me, and then it's Chris at cisaconsultants.com, and Cisa, Cisa.
Thank you. So it's been Consultants Corner with Chris Sprague from Cisa Consultants, and we've been creating better understanding and insight and changing the industry narrative. Thank you all for listening. Thank you, Chris.
Thank you. Thank you all for listening.